Ever been scuba diving? And, you see those divers who just look like they're floating effortlessly?
Yeah.
It's like they've unlocked some secret underwater zen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, today's deep dive is your cheat sheet to joining that club.
Okay.
We're going deep, no pun intended, on the physics of buoyancy,
Right.
how pressure, volume, all that sciencey stuff actually affects your gear and your whole dive.
Yeah.
Now, before you click away thinking this is going to be like high school physics class all over again, I promise it's not.
Definitely not.
We've got a stack of research here, articles, and it's actually fascinating stuff. We're
Absolutely.
talking practical tips,
Mm-hmm.
things that'll make your dives smoother, safer, and honestly, just way more fun.
What I find really interesting is how many divers, even like experienced ones, they haven't really made the connection between the physics and what they're feeling down there.
Yeah, totally.
It's like they know it's happening, but they don't know why.
Exactly. Like we all know to equalize our masks,
Yeah.
right? But could you explain off the top of your head why that's so important?
Well, that's a great question, and it all boils down to pressure differentials.
Okay.
You descend, right? The water pressure increases, and what happens is the air spaces in your mask, even your wetsuit, they start to compress.
And that's what causes those interesting little sensations,
Exactly.
like mask squeeze, suit squeeze.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it can be pretty strange, especially, for newer divers who haven't experienced it before.
Yeah.
Imagine someone's kind of like gently sucking on your eyeball.
Okay, I could have lived without that visual.
Yeah.
But seriously though, is that dangerous or just like really uncomfortable?
Most of the time, it's just kind of a weird feeling. But yeah, if you ignore it, mask squeeze, it can lead to some broken blood vessels.
Okay.
And then suit squeeze, if you have a wetsuit that's like way too big,
Oh yeah.
it can actually be pretty painful.
Okay.
So yeah, it's important to address it.
So prevention is key here.
Absolutely.
What's the magic trick? How do we avoid becoming a human suction cup?
You've got to equalize.
Yeah.
As you go down, just gently exhale through your nose into your mask. It just adds a little bit of air to counteract that compression.
Okay.
And for suit squeeze, just make sure your wetsuit fits well, no huge air pockets. And then if you feel a pinch, a gentle tug to let some water in usually does the trick.
Simple enough.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about like the holy grail of scuba diving, achieving that perfect buoyancy.
Yes.
It's like, I don't know, trying to find that balance point on a seesaw,
Yeah.
except you're, underwater.
Right.
And your weight seems to be constantly changing.
That's a great analogy. And the main reason your weight feels like it's changing is because of how that pressure is affecting the volume of air in all your gear.
Okay, break that down for me. Like, what's actually happening?
Sure.
I go deeper. How does that mess with the air in my stuff?
So think about your BCD,
Yeah.
your buoyancy control device,
Right.
full of air, right? Yeah.
So as you go down, that pressure from the water, it squishes that air, making it take up less and less space.
Okay.
And less volume equals less upward force, so you become less buoyant.
So it's like my BCD is slowly like deflating itself even though I haven't touched the valves or anything.
Basically, yes.
Wow.
And the same thing is happening, in the tiny air cells of your wetsuit,
Oh, wow.
if you're wearing one.
Yeah.
This is why we talk about weighting so much.
Yeah.
Getting the right amount of weight is all about counteracting that ever-changing buoyancy.
Which brings us to the weight check, right?
Yes.
Which I think a lot of new divers, they kind of dread it.
Yeah.
But I was reading in one of these articles, this dive instructor compared it to finding like the perfect pair of shoes.
That's a great way to put it.
It's essential for comfort, for safety.
It makes all the difference. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
A good weight check and make sure you've got just enough lead to counteract that positive buoyancy at the surface.
Right. But not so much that you plummet to the bottom like a stone.
Right. Yeah.
You want to be able to go down comfortably and safely.
So walk me through this. How do we actually do a proper weight check? One of the articles mentioned something about like doing it with all your gear on, including the tank.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you want to have everything on because all those little things make a difference in your buoyancy. So you're fully geared up, empty BCD, and you should be floating at eye level,
Okay.
just with a normal breath.
Okay.
Now, when you exhale completely, you should start to sink, but slowly.
Okay. So like nice controlled descent.
Exactly. If you're dropping like a rock or like shooting up like a cork, you're going to need to adjust those weights. It's about finding that, that sweet spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's something else to keep in mind here. Air cylinders, they change weight as you breathe them down.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I never even thought about that.
As you use the air in your cylinder, it actually gets lighter. So you're going to become more buoyant throughout the dive, even if you don't even touch your BCD.
Wow, there's so much more to this buoyancy thing than I realized. Speaking of which, I think it's time we surface for a minute.
Yeah.
We'll take a look at how this all ties into air consumption when we come back. All right, so we're back and ready to really dive into why proper weighting isn't just about being comfortable down there. It's about making that air last.
Exactly. It all comes back to understanding how depth affects the air you breathe.
Okay, so help me understand that. Like, how does going deeper change things? I thought a breath of air was a breath of air.
Well, not quite. Remember how we were talking about pressure increasing as you descend?
Yeah.
So that pressure, it actually compresses the air that you're breathing from your tank, makes
Yeah.
it denser. It's like each breath you take down there has more air molecules in it than a breath at the surface.
Whoa. So even if my breathing rate stays the same, I'm using up my air faster just because I'm deeper.
Exactly. And that's where the weighting thing really comes back to bite you. Because if you're overweighted, you need to add more air to your BCD to compensate.
Right. Got to fight that sinking feeling.
Exactly. But that means you're tapping into your tank even more, especially at depth, where each breath is already denser because of that pressure.
Like a double whammy.
Yeah,
Depth and extra weight, they're just tag teaming my air supply.
exactly. And that's why that weight check, nailing that is so important.
Yeah.
Think of it like this. Every extra pound of weight you have on, you could be using up to 5% more air, depending on the dive.
Wow.
And that can really shorten your dive time, especially as you go deeper.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty compelling argument for streamlining my weight. But it's not just about how much weight I have, right? Like the type of gear I choose, that must make a difference
Well,
too.
absolutely. Different gear choices can significantly impact your buoyancy, like a thicker wetsuit. Yeah, it'll keep you warmer, but it also increases your buoyancy, which then you need to compensate for with more weight.
So it's all about finding that balance. Like
Yes.
warmth, comfort, buoyancy.
Exactly. Even things like the type of BCD you're using, the size of your fins, even the material they're made of, that all comes into play.
It's like putting a puzzle together.
It really is.
All these pieces, they got to work together to have that nice, seamless, enjoyable dive.
Absolutely. There's no one right answer for everyone. That's why, it's so valuable to work with a good dive professional who can help you figure out your weighting, help you work on those buoyancy skills, and then choose gear that's right for you and how you dive.
It's like having a personal buoyancy coach.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on to some of the things that can kind of sneak up on you and affect your balance underwater, I wanted to touch on something one of these articles mentioned, trim.
Oh, yeah.
What does that mean in the context of diving? So trim, we hear that word a lot in diving. What's it all about?
Well, think of it like this. Good trim is all about being streamlined in the water. It's about distributing your weight so you're not dragging your fins or, kicking up a storm.
Right, so it's about efficiency.
Exactly. And comfort, too. With good trim, you're moving through the water more smoothly, using less air, and putting less strain on your body.
Makes sense. So how do we actually achieve that perfect, torpedo-like trim? What do we need to think about?
It's all about adjusting your gear, like
Yeah.
where your weights are positioned, the length of your BCD straps, even how you pack your dive gear can affect your trim.
Huh, I never thought about that.
Well,
So
yeah.
it's like fine-tuning, right?
Exactly. And just like with weighting, it might take a few dives to really get it dialed in for your body and your gear, but once you do, you'll feel the difference.
That's buoyancy and trim covered.
Yeah.
Any other kind of curveballs we should watch out for? Things that can throw us off balance down there that we might not always think about?
Oh, absolutely. Like currents.
Oh, yeah. Those can be tricky.
Even a mild current can really mess with your buoyancy if you're not expecting it.
Right, because it's like you forget how much denser water is than air.
Exactly. You get that force working against you. It can really push you around.
Yeah, it's like trying to walk against a strong wind, but, you're 30 feet underwater.
Right. And, if you're not careful, a current can push you off course, increase your air consumption as you fight against it. Suddenly, your night's relaxing dive is a bit of a struggle.
Not exactly the Zen experience we're going for.
Right.
So how do we avoid getting caught off guard?
Yeah.
What can we do to prepare for the unexpected current?
Awareness. That's key. Before you even get in the water, check the local conditions. Talk to people who dive the site regularly. Have a plan in case things get a bit swirly down there.
Okay, so do your research.
Yeah.
And once you're actually down there, what then?
Yeah.
Just being really aware of how you're feeling, what you're seeing.
Exactly. Like look around. Is there kelp swaying? Ripples on the surface?
Yeah.
How much effort is it taking you to move?
Yeah.
Those are all clues.
Yeah, those subtle cues that are easy to miss.
Exactly, but they can tell you a lot about what the water's doing.
Now, speaking of things that can kind of sneak up on you, I was
Yeah.
reading that,
Mm.
believe it or not, our own bodies can really affect our buoyancy.
Oh, for sure. It's
That's true.
truer than we realize, right?
Definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not static creatures. Our bodies change, and even small changes can impact our buoyancy.
Give me an example.
Okay, well, have you ever noticed, like, after a particularly salty meal, you feel a bit more, well, bloated?
Yeah.
That water retention, that actually increases your buoyancy a little bit.
Wow.
On the flip side, a really heavy meal, not that I'm recommending that before a dive, but that can actually make you less buoyant.
I would never have even thought about that. It's amazing how these little things all add up, right?
It's true. And it's not just food either. Even your breathing pattern can make a difference.
Okay, now that's just wild. How does breathing affect buoyancy?
Well, think about what happens when you take a deep breath in. Your lungs expand, right?
So you're literally increasing your volume, which makes you slightly more buoyant. And then when you exhale all the way, you become a tiny bit less buoyant.
Wow.
So yeah, if you're breathing really heavily, maybe you're excited or a little stressed, you might actually find yourself bobbing up and down a bit more than usual.
So that calm, steady breathing, it's not just about conserving air. It's actually a buoyancy control technique, too.
Exactly. It all ties together.
Well, I have to say, this entire deep dive has been pretty eye-opening.
It's fascinating stuff.
We've gone from basic physics to the realization that, even a bag of chips can affect my time underwater. It's incredible.
It really goes to show you there's always something new to learn about buoyancy.
Right. It's not just as simple as, like, am I floating or sinking?
Mm-hmm.
There's way more to it.
Exactly. And the more you understand about how it all works, your gear, your body, the environment, the more you'll be able to really fine-tune your buoyancy and just have a much better experience underwater.
It's like mastering that dance with the water, right?
Yes.
Working with it, not against
Oh.
it. Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to surface for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into buoyancy. Remember, the more you know, the safer and more enjoyable your dives will be. Until next time, happy bubbles, everyone.